Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of At the Horn. Today's episode is part two of us grading every team's offseason. But before we get into that, we'll just quickly talk about the season so far. We're a few days into the NBA season. We have had some great games to start the season, including multiple double overtime games and multiple overtime games early on. Max, what's a quick recap you have of the new season?
Yeah. I mean, it's not only the fact that we're having double overtime games, but we're also having like historic performances. We're having numerous 50 plus point games from Shea. We just saw one last night from Austin Reeves, of all people.
Aaron Gordon, too.
Aaron Gordon with the 50 piece. It's unbelievable. These guys it's the new, like back when we started watching, I guess 10 years ago. I'm acting like we're old, but these guys were dropping 30 and like the crowd is going crazy, and social media would go crazy over 30-point games, but now it's 50 seems regular. And so really excited to see maybe some of those, maybe Kobe's 81 might be up
It's
for
possible.
grabs.
It,
So we'll see.
closer and
But
closer.
yeah, great start to the year.
But yeah, all right, let's get into the rest of our grades. So yeah, all right, we'll go with the Atlanta Hawks. So the Hawks in the offseason, they made quite a few moves actually. They traded Gorgas Niang to pick up Kristaps Porzingis, which it was a salary dumping move for the Celtics. The Hawks take a risk on Porzingis. They also signed Nickeil Alexander-Walker to a 4-year, $60 million deal, and they signed Luke Kennard to a 1-year, $11 million deal. They did lose Karis LeVert, Terrence Mann, Clint Capella, and Larry Nance Jr. What are your thoughts on the Hawks offseason, Max?
Yeah, I think overall it was a net positive offseason. Going after Kristaps Porzingis from a team fit perspective makes sense. Pairing him with Trey Young, you got Jalen Johnson back from injury. I think it's a nice backcourt and front court combo that they have in Atlanta. My concern is their depth to a certain degree, but I think they're really excited about the first overall pick from last year, the most random first overall pick of all time, but at least talked about at least. So I think the Hawks have an exciting team. I'm currently based in Atlanta. I'm looking forward to checking them out in person. So overall, I think it was some good moves getting Alexander Walker to fill that potential bench void. I know he had a rough start to the year. I think I saw he was like 2 of 12 from the field or something. But that's what you get from him. He takes a lot of shots, but other times, he's that lockdown guy who can hit five threes in a game and really change the course of a playoff series, even. So um, I think overall, I'd give them like a B plus offseason grade.
Yeah, for me, the thing I really liked about the Hawks offseason was is very low risk. They're not trading any future draft capital. They're just taking on guys with risky contracts with Porzingis, and they signed Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 4 years, 60 million. You could argue it's a lot, but for a guy who is such a good defender, he's very rarely going to be a net negative on your team. And I think that those are two guys that fit Trey Young's play style very well, especially because Trey Young is such a net negative on defense. Having a guy like Alexander Walker to offset that. Um, yeah, I mean, and Luke Kennard was a nice pickup as well. Good 3-point shooter to pair with Trey. I think their biggest weakness right now is they don't really have a backup point guard. I've seen they're kind of playing some lineups with Kennard at the one, which is kind of weird. But that's their big weakness. Other than that, I think the team got much better. And this is kind of like their last ditch effort to make a winning team around Trey Young. We'll see how the season progresses. They've been okay so far, but they need some time to kind of figure things out. So I'll give them an A minus. I think overall they made low risk, high reward moves.
Yeah, and I mean, come playoff time, having Dyson Daniels and Alexander Walker lock down a two or three guard, it's going to be great to see, and I think that can help them maybe get past the first round this year. But overall, I think they're a pretty mediocre team, but we'll see. And speaking of mediocre, let's move on to the Memphis Grizzlies. Um, Weird offseason, but in terms of a return for Desmond Bain, getting five first rounders is pretty unbelievable. As well as KCP, who's, he's a solid player. He will contribute to that team this year. I think they'll certainly have a shot to make the play in. Um, Probably not do a whole bunch after that. Uh, as an offseason, though, Desmond Bain wasn't a guy who I saw getting dealt by any means, but they also got Ty Jerome. They extended Jaren Jackson Jr., who I love as a player. Aldama has proven that he can be an effective big off the bench. So again, B plus. Like I think you won't necessarily see the fruits of the trade in the next few years, maybe, but I think they're trying to follow that soft rebuild type of template. And so I'm excited to see what their team looks like in about 5 years down the line when Jaw is a little more seasoned as a veteran.
Yeah, I think you described it perfectly with a weird off season because it was. I mean, that like you said, they're doing a soft rebuild, which to me is a weird thing to do in the Western Conference because there's so many teams that are so competitive that you're getting worse now. To me, it almost feels like if you're going to make that move with Desmond Bain, which I think overall is a good move when you're getting 5 first round picks. But if you're doing that, I think you got to go all out. At the very least, trade Ja Morant. I mean, you can keep Triple J, but I think that like you're in this sort of weird area where you're not really competing at a high level, but you're also not tanking to get a draft pick. Um, and so I think that this team is just going to be consistently mediocre. I think if the Grizzlies were in the East, it would be a completely different story. But I feel like this team at best is a play-in team. Like maybe they can sneak into the playoffs through the play-in, but because of that, I'll give them like a B because I do think the move in and of itself is good, but I think that there's a lot more that they need to do. And I think the Ty Jerome signing is fine. He had a good year in Cleveland. He kind of fell off during the playoffs, so we'll see if he can bounce back. But I definitely don't dislike that signing. So yeah, I'll say a B.
Yeah, also Zach Edey is somebody who now we're gonna see maybe hopefully get more minutes as the season progresses. He was somewhat on a minutes restriction last year, and when he was with Purdue, that was never an issue. He always played enough, so I'm excited to see kind of how that might progress for them. So yeah,
All right, so moving on to the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls, they didn't have too much going in the offseason. Their big move was trading Lonzo Ball to the Cavs for Isaac Okoro. Isaac Okoro so far has not been great. I mean, it's very early, but he's had multiple 0 point games. And they re-signed Josh Giddey to a 4 year, $100 million contract, which I think is good value for Giddey. That's like starter money right there. With some of the other contracts that these guys are getting, I think that that's definitely fair value. If not, he was a little underpaid. Um, yeah, the Bulls, at least so far to start the season, have actually been pretty good. They're 2-0. We'll see if they can keep that up. Um, but they kind of fit into the king that like they're pretty much the Sacramento Kings. They have a
younger. They are
yes,
younger.
yes, that is a good point. That I think a few years ago it was more so true, but it feels like every single year the Bulls are one of those last teams in the play-in and they lose in that play-in game, and it feels like this roster is going to be very similar to that. But you're right, they are younger. I think their next move should be to trade Kobe White. I think you could get some good draft capital from that. Um, but overall, I mean, there's not really too much to hate in their offseason. Sure, they didn't make any big moves, but I like the Josh Giddey signing for the price, and I'm fine with the Alonzo Ball trade. I think you could have gotten more value for him. Maybe if you waited until the trade deadline this season, if he was healthy, you could have gotten something more for him. Because I don't love Isaac Okoro, so I'll say B. I'll also give them a B.
Well, we know you like Josh Giddey, taking him 12th overall or whatever you did in
Oh,
fantasy.
in the
It's
fantasy, yeah, yeah, yeah.
ridiculous. But
That's more
yeah,
so stat wise, but yeah.
alrighty. Yeah, but I think he's a fine player. I don't love him defensively. I think he's somewhat limited as a shooter. But yeah, 25 million a year is fine. But overall, really just nothing much to it. C plus. They'll be a playing team maybe. Moving on to the Kings. So in sunny old Sacramento,
Go to
they
the West.
signed Dennis Schroeder, pairing him with another demon in Russell Westbrook, and trading Valanciunas for Saric and signing Drew Eubanks. Eubanks has shown like a ability as a center. I think Valanciunas he's a bit slower. He's objectively a better player in my opinion than Eubanks, but for the style of play that the Kings have, I think Valanciunas was kind of always wanting to leave last year, it seemed like, and he got out, um and then he didn't necessarily want to join the Nuggets, and there's all that drama. But um regardless, I think Schroeder's a great player. He's a terrific defender, even though Austin Reeves just scored 51 on him. I think he's a great player, and I love that signing for them again. But just like the Bulls, like all these teams that are kind of at the bottom of our list here, kind of in purgatory. Maybe we'll make a play-in. Weirdly constructed team, one of the worst constructed rosters that I've seen in terms of age and contracts and just lack of future direction. Got a good deal this summer with Keegan Murray. Really like him as a player, and so, but the only notable is Schroeder, and so that's another C plus.
Yeah, I think Schroeder was a fine signing. I think the contract is fair at, the 3 year 45 million. And he's starting for them. He's been solid so far. But like you said, like it's just a weird roster. I think they have a lot of high usage players who, especially DeRozan, a lot of their players are at their best in the mid range, which the mid range in general is kind of dying in today's NBA. DeRozan isn't the best 3 point shooter. Same with Sabonis. They work a lot better in the mid range and, closer to the paint. But yeah, they don't have a lot of shooting. I think that's their biggest problem.
Yeah,
And they have a bunch of high contract players who are like slightly below all star caliber, and they clearly just don't mesh well. So I think they kind of waited too long to sort of make these moves and trade their quote unquote star players when they were at their highest value. Um, so I guess I understand why they're just trying to run it back and see if they can compete, but I personally I don't see it. I think once they traded De'Aaron Fox, they shouldn't have gone for Zach LaVine. They should have just went the full rebuild. And then there's the other thing with Valanciunas for Dario Saric. At the trade deadline, they traded 3 second round picks for Valanciunas, and then they ship him off for Dario Saric a few months later. That was really bad in my opinion. So I'm gonna give him a C.
fair enough. Moving on to sunny Miami. So Miami Heat had an eventful start to the offseason going after Norman Powell for honestly very little to give up between Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson the second for a borderline all-star. So one of the best trades that I've seen in a long time. So that trade gets an A plus for me. Pairing him with Tyler Hero when he comes back from injury, that's, you know, a decent scoring punch between those two and Tap Bam and Kalel Ware. Like that's an exciting team to watch. And if I'm a Miami fan, like I'm excited. I'm excited about that roster. You got Davion Mitchell balling out. To end last season, he was one of the hottest players in the league, and starting off this year, equally well. Getting him for 12 million a year this offseason again to resign. Signed our guy Precious Achua from the Knicks, who definitely showed that he was more than capable of coming in and impacting a game. Fontecchio, I don't really care much for. I know you're a little higher on him, but I think he sure can kind of fill that Kyle Anderson role. So the Heat are an exciting team, incredible trade. You lose Duncan Robinson, you lose Highsmith, but I think that Powell trade for me brings them to like a straight A.
Yeah, well, see, I actually view Fontecchio as the Duncan Robinson replacement more so than the Kyle Anderson one. He's there to be their 3 point shooter, and so far he's done a really good job. But again, with a shooter like that, it's like there's a lot of recency bias there. He could very well fall off later in the season. But as for now, that was looking like a good move to get Fontecchio in the sign trade for Duncan Robinson, and then. Yeah, like you said, the Norman Powell trade was an absolute steal. I mean, that's such like it's such low risk, high reward. You're virtually trading nothing. And like you said, Norman Powell, I think should have been an all star. If not, he was very close to being an all star. So you combine that move with the Davion Mitchell signing, which I think is an absolute steal, 2 year, 24 million. I'm with you. I think it's an A. I think the Heat have looked pretty good to start the year. They absolutely dominated the Grizzlies the other night, and they beat the Knicks last night. They're looking pretty good. And this is all without Tyler Hero, so I'm giving them an A.
And you also know no matter what, they're gonna draft a steal. no
Yeah.
no matter what. And they drafted a guy, and I'm not gonna butcher his name. I'm not gonna attempt to say it, but he's a point guard from Illinois. And the NBA experts are already saying that he's, the next big thing for them. And of course, like they never miss as a franchise for those steals. And so excited to see what he looks like at the point guard position. Right now they got Mitchell kind of filling that role. So we'll see if that can be maintained. But great. And moving on to the Mavs, they're the talk of the offseason between their GM and obviously the departure of Luca last season and the draft lottery somehow going their way. No comment. But signing D'Angelo Russell, good move. 6.5 million a year. Kyrie Irving, extending him. They're putting all their eggs in that basket, right? They want to extend PJ Washington, Kyrie. They want to keep that core together with AD and see what it looks like with Cooper Flag. Obviously, good move in taking Cooper Flag. I think he's one of the best prospects we've seen in a while outside of Wemby and Zion in my eyes. And so I think they're certainly going to have a bright future, a huge team in terms of height. With Kyrie coming back, though, it'll mix things up a bit whenever that is. So, yeah, I think D'Lo, great signing, extended who they needed to, pick the right guy in the draft. It's a B plus offseason.
For me, it feels so hard to give them a good grade just after the Luka Doncic trade. Like my whole thought process behind them changes so much because they got infinitely worse after that trade. Obviously, Cooper Flag at the number one pick, that's a no-brainer. But I mean, the Mavs haven't looked that great to start the year. Like you said, they've been running a very big lineup. So we'll have to see how that works out long term. D'Angelo Russell coming off the bench. I mean, I think that's the right move. He's a scorer and pretty much nothing else. So he kind of fits that 6 man role more. Um, it's hard. It's hard to grade their off season because they didn't really do much. Obviously, they picked Cooper Flag, and they signed D'Lo, but that's it. And considering how tough the West is right now, I think that they could have tried to make some other moves, get another point guard. I think that they're very wing heavy with PJ Washington, Najee Marshall, Max Christie. I think that making trading one of those guys to get another prominent point guard would have been something that they could have done for me to get a higher grade. So I'll give them a C plus.
Fair enough. Now we can keep this one super quick because they literally did nothing. The Toronto Raptors, they lost Chris Boucher, they signed Mamu, and they extended Pirtle to a 4-year 105. Pirtle's obviously had a great end of the season last year. Honestly, a great overall season. Um, they're sticking with their core of, Manuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, Brandon Ingram has looked very good to start the year. Um, that they're going to be an okay team this year. But really nothing notable this off season. I'll give them a C, C plus.
Yeah, it almost feels like their offseason move was the trade for Brandon Ingram, but it just happened at the trade deadline. They're a very weird team. They have so much money invested into quickly Barrett, Ingram, and Scotty Barnes, and that is nowhere close to a championship team. Arguably not even a playoff team. I mean, with the East being the East, I could see them sneaking into like a 6 seed maybe, but this feels like a team that's destined to be blown up in a year or two. I'll give them a C. They just basically stayed the same. I mean, I like Damamu signing at the price, but nothing crazy.
Fair enough. Now, my roommate here loves the Phoenix Suns. And so he's probably going to be a bit potentially upset with my assessment of the Suns. I think the trade for Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the 10th pick in a few seconds for Kevin Durant is decent. It's certainly not, in my mind, the best return they could have gotten for KD. Say if they traded him at the deadline last year or earlier in the offseason, potentially. Um, I think also weird moves between having Nick Richards, drafting Malawak, and trading a late first for Mark Williams. Those are three bigs that are very similar in play style, especially Mark Williams and Malawak. I think my player comp for Malawak coming out of the draft was Mark Williams. And so it was weird to trade, I believe, on draft night or maybe the day before for Mark Williams and then go ahead and take a very comparable player. And there's a time where they didn't have any point guard presence. And they really still don't. I don't think Devin Booker's natural point guard. I don't like him bringing the ball up. I like when the ball is not in his hands. He showed in the Olympics how good of a player he is off ball. And we know he's arguably the best shooting guard in the NBA. Um, but yeah, the trade was not that good in my eyes. I obviously don't like Dylan Brooks. Don't think he's that good of a player. That's just my opinion. Um, they extended Devin Booker, good move. But yeah, overall the trade was and they didn't do a whole lot outside of that. Mark Williams is a good player, so I'll give him a B minus.
It's hard to fully assess because Jalen Green hasn't played yet for them, and I think once he's healthy, I feel like he's going to be more of the point guard, and Booker can play more off ball, which will help. Um, but I agree with you. I think it's a fine trade. It very much seemed like the Suns weren't getting many offers for KD, many good offers. And I think you at least with Jalen Green that there's some upside there. I'm not the biggest Jalen Green fan, but that he does have that all-star potential if he can make that leap. It's very questionable if he can, but again, there's that upside. And then Dylan Brooks, I think, is a fine starting player in this league. He's a good defender. He's a good three-point shooter. He doesn't give you much else, but as an addition to the getting Jalen Green, I don't think it's bad. You add in the number 10 pick. Like you said, though, the center rotation is very weird. And we mentioned all those centers, Mark Williams and Nick Richards, but Oso Ighodaro is the one who's starting, right? So all the moves that they made to get those centers, those aren't the most prominent ones on the team. So a lot of the offseason moves are very weird to me. Again, I think the Kevin Durant trade is fine, but with all these weird moves to trading kind of future prospects for backup centers, I'll give them a C.
Enough. Moving on to the Brooklyn Nets, aka the arena that does not have any true fans in it. Sorry. Actually, beautiful arena, Barclays. I've always enjoyed my time going to those games. But that being said, weird. I've been saying it about a lot of these teams. Another weird offseason. Cam Thomas on a 1 year, 6 mil. Good deal. Weird though that a player who would have a 24 point per game season is going for 6 million. Um, he also just scored 40 points and had 0 assists. A very Cam Thomas game. Um, Sadly, they did trade the other Cam Johnson, for Michael Porter Jr. and a first round pick. I think Michael Porter Jr., at least coming out of Missouri, he was the number one prospect in high school. People are really excited about him. He had comps to Kevin Durant. If he can kind of foster any of that energy and be that number one option that he once was, I think it could be a great trade. But overall, I'd give him a B off season.
I think for me, I think the Michael Porter Jr. trade is one of the most win-win trades we've seen in a while. I think it was a great move for Denver to get Cam Johnson, who I think is the better player. But the Nets got a 2032 unprotected pick from the Nuggets. By that time, all the players that the Nuggets have are going to be way past their prime. And by that point, they are very likely going to be in a rebuild. So I think that being able to get that pick is an absolute steal. On the Nuggets end of things, they want to win now. So getting rid of that pick to kind of hurt their future a little bit is okay because they should be putting all of their chips, into one basket. So I really like the trade for both teams. But with in addition to that, I think getting Cam Thomas on a 1 year $6 million deal is great. When a player's a restricted free agent, they have very little, you know, I guess wiggle room, like say in the matter, because they don't really have other options. So I mean, it worked out great for the Nets. We'll see what happens after this year, whether they re-sign him to a bigger deal or he goes elsewhere. But at least for now, I think that's a good move. They didn't do much else. They got Terrence Mann as part of the Porzingis deal. I think he's a fine player. Haywood Highsmith. So they have decent role players. Those are the type of players that they could trade at the trade deadline for, a few second round picks, which, adds more value to their roster long term. They lost Cam Johnson, they lost D'Lo, who they were going to lose him anyway. Boyan Bogdanovich retired, and they lost Trendon Watford. But overall, with the two main, the trade and the signing of Cam Thomas, I'll give them an A minus, maybe even an A. I'm high on their moves.
Well, but here's something we do have to address. There's two things. First things first, the 2032 first round pick that they traded for was born in 2014. Something that is bizarre to think
That's
about.
crazy.
So more than likely they'll take an 18-year-old freshman coming out of college. But I think we'd also be remiss not to talk about the fact that they had four first round picks this year. Um, and they definitely went the developmental route with almost each and every one of them. They took Demon out of BYU, who killed my Wisconsin Badgers during the March Madness tournament. And I'm actually super excited about him. I think Danny Wolf, too, his value at the end of the first round. A lot of people weren't that high on it, but he's proven that he can be a really good passing big in this league, and we've seen the value in that in players like Isaiah Hartenstein and what that element adds to an offense as it did with the Thunder. So I think that their draft picks, although they were somewhat slandered right after the draft, I was pretty happy with how that turned out for the Nets. So I can be swayed to that A minus territory just based on their draft return.
I kind of forgot about the draft ends of thing. I do think their draft was a little weird. I saw that it was the first time in NBA history that a team had made four first round draft picks without trading any of them. So I think that grade is very much a TBD. It just depends if one or two of these guys can have more upside than maybe we see. We'll have to wait and see, but I'll still stick with my A minus A. I think overall they had a good offseason.
Great. Moving on to Portland. They traded Simons for Holiday. Holiday, I believe you can correct me if I'm wrong, was already once traded to the Blazers
Yes,
and
yes, and that
then
was quickly
got traded
traded again.
again. So he finally lands in his true home in Portland. And then ended up getting Dame. He's returning home as well. Um, but they lost Simons and Aiton. Not a whole lot of moves of note. I'm excited to see how Klingon looks this year. Donovan Klingon out of UConn. Um, they obviously picked him pretty high in last year's draft, and they're high on him as a prospect. Denny Avdija. But the big story with the Blazers is Chauncey Billups, their head coach, sudden departure, and so really interested to see how that kind of pans out this season. So we'll see. Tiago Splitter taking over the reins at head coach, a player that I remember watching um, with when he was with the Spurs. So yeah, I think overall it's a B. Yeah, B.
Well, first I want to say I think it's funny that the Blazers now have both Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard because they traded Damian Lillard for Drew Holiday and then they moved off of Holiday, so I think it's funny that they now have both of them. But yeah, so when I first saw the Drew Holiday trade, I was pretty down on it for the Blazers because there was a lot of talk that the Celtics were going to have to add draft capital to get off that Holiday contract. The more I think about it, the more I like the move. He's had a pretty damn good start for the Blazers. And I think it's nice to just have a veteran like that
And
on the team. Say that again?
For Scoot Henderson too, having
Yeah,
that presence.
exactly. And so like Anthony Simons, he wasn't there were no plans for him to stay in the team long term. So I think you getting a nice veteran player for Simons, I think that's a win. Um and then in terms of their other moves, I mean the only other big move was signing Damian Lillard, which for 3 year 41 million, I don't hate it at all. It's another veteran. Obviously he's not going to play this season, but long term, I mean, who knows? Maybe they could get another trade package for him, or he can just be that kind of vet who ends his career in Portland, like so many other vets have done, like Dirk and whatnot. So I'll give them a B plus. I like the Holiday move and I like the Lillard signing.
Yang Hansen. I definitely mispronounced his name, but the phenom center out of China, they're calling Baby Jokic. I think, he has a lot of potential. A bit weird given Klingon being picked the previous year. But yeah, I'm excited to see how it looks. So moving on to the Sixers, they really didn't have a lot of capital to work with. They signed Trendon Watford. They lost Yabusele, but they got Grimes back. So Grimes obviously had an incredible end of the year. They have a lot of guards. They have a lot of twos on their team. In my mind, Tyrese Maxey's a two. Then they just drafted VJ Edgecombe, who's a two. They have Jared McCain, who's a two. Quentin Grimes, who's a two. All these guys can average on, let's just say, the Nets. Obviously, we know Maxey can, but I think all these guys can average 18 plus a game in the right system. And so they have a lot of guard talent. Um, I think they certainly hit on Edgecombe. He's a tremendous prospect and the early rookie of the year favorite. Obviously, we've only played 3 or 4 games, but an unbelievable start to a career for the Baylor product. So just for the draft pick alone and nailing that pick, sticking to their guns, not necessarily going after Ace Bailey, who didn't want to be with the Sixers to begin with, and their limited cap space, getting Grimes back and getting Watford, who's shown that he can be a serviceable player off the bench. I'd give him a an A minus because I that's how much I love Edgecombe.
Yeah, I mean Edgecombe has had a fantastic start, so I'm high on that was like their big move, right? And so I'm high on that. They got Quentin Grimes for the qualifying offer. That's the best they could do. And again, we'll see if they want to re-sign him. I'm thinking they might not. I'm thinking he might be a trade deadline trade just because, like you said, you had McCain, you have Maxey, and you have Edgecombe. There's not a lot of room in the guard position. But overall, the Edgecombe draft alone, I'm gonna give them an A. Like he's been awesome so far. Moving on to the Spurs. So they signed Luke Cornett to a 4-year, $41 million deal. That was their big one. They got Kelly Olynyk via trade. They signed Lindy Waters the third, and they extended De'Aaron Fox to a 4-year, 229 mil. So what do you think?
Yeah, and they also had 2 lottery picks, I believe, between Colin Murray Bowles and the son of Ron Harper, Dylan Harper. And so they took Dylan Harper second overall out of Rutgers, 6'6" point guard, maybe 6'5", lefty, a nice change of pace, and a guy that obviously is stoked to play with Wembanyama, who has started off this year looking like the greatest player to ever grace the basketball court, and that's not even an exaggeration.
It's insane.
So yeah, I think that's like really exciting. Having him with Luke Cornett, I think is kind of like a funny little duo. Um,
You see, they're
I
calling the duo French Vanilla.
I did see that. Yeah, it's very good. And I think Wemby, yeah, I think he's poised to have an unreal year. Fox got a ton of money, 229 on a 4-year deal. I get it. Um, with that being said, I don't know how they're going to be able to pay a lot of these guys. I think maybe they're intentional on the 4-year side of things, as I think those that are on rookie deals, at least Dylan Harper won't be coinciding with that. So maybe their thought would be Dylan Harper would take over that backcourt from Fox down the line, and they can maybe deal him um, a little bit later for maybe a three. But we'll see. Devin Vassell's exciting. They got good depth off the bench. I think they're an early, sneaky 5 seed even
Yeah, had
in
a
the
good start.
West.
Uh,
So yeah, I think overall, love their draft. I think Cornette, solid player, did what they had to do, re-sign Fox, and they didn't really have any key major departures in my mind. So B plus.
Yeah, like you said, the De'Aaron Fox extension and everything, it's going to be a little weird because they also have Harbor and Castle. So I'm wondering what their long-term plan is with him. Like you said, I think the 4-year deal was very calculated because of Dylan Harper being on his rookie contract. But I feel like they have to trade one of these guys, right? Like they look really good right now. They're undefeated. And you have Stephon Castle's been great. Dylan Harper has been right off the bat has been great. So I'm a little curious as to what is going to happen with their guard rotation. Are they going to start Castle at the two and Vassell's going to come off the bench? Is same thing with Harper. There's a lot of guard minutes, and Sohan's been out for an injury, so he's going to have to play into that rotation as well.
I
So
don't
I'm
know if he
interested.
does. I don't. I'll be I don't know if he
He's been
does.
solid. We'll have to see, but I think that's the question. It's like they have a lot of young players, so have to see who makes the rotation, who doesn't, and how many minutes each one of them gets. Because there's a lot of talent there, with Vassell, Keldon Johnson as well. I think one of those guys is definitely going to be on the move as the season progresses, but it'll be interesting to see which player is preferred in that rotation.
Yeah.
So moving on to the Charlotte Hornets. They did sign Spencer Dinwiddie to a 1 year deal, but he decided to go and play in France. They acquired Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic. They got Pat Connaughton, and they signed Mason Plumlee. Me personally, I think getting Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic is definitely a win. He's been pretty great for them so far. The Hornets feel like they've been trying to compete for so long, and they just haven't. The last time they made the playoffs was 2016, which is currently the longest drought. Um, and that's a fan base who's desperate to see them make the playoffs. So I like any sort of move that makes them more competitive, and I think the Colin Sexton move is that. Um, and I like that he's starting. Because Sexton has been a bench player in this league for years. So I like that they're giving him an opportunity to be in that starting lineup. LaMelo Ball has been great so far. And you just again, it's always the injuries with the Hornets. Brendan Miller just went down. We don't know how long he's going to be out for. John Morant had a similar injury and he was out for months. So hopefully that's not the case with Miller. And then we all know about LaMelo Ball's injury concerns. But I mean, the Hornets didn't have a lot to work with, and they got Colin Sexton. I'll give them a B.
Yeah, I think also drafting Colin Knippel was a great move. They took him fourth overall, I believe, which is a bit earlier than I expected Colin to go. That being said, if you want a guy that like can play his role, catch and shoot, quick release, kind of take some of the pressure off of LaMelo, who plays like he has zero pressure on him. It's unbelievable to watch him play so nonchalant. But I think, like you said, Sexton's a good move. I'm okay with the B.
Yeah. Moving on to the Pelicans. So the Pelicans made a few moves. They signed Kevon Looney to a 2 year, $16 million contract. They traded CJ McCollum to the Wizards for Jordan Poole. They acquired Sadiq Bey, and they extended Herb Jones for 3 years, $68 million. Um, I'm pretty high on all these moves. I think Kevon Looney is the only one where I'm like, okay, they need some center depth, so it's fine. I think, especially with Yves Missy going down with an injury, but I like the CJ McCollum trade quite a bit. I think he's moving past his prime. I think if you waited too much longer to trade him, he would have had no value whatsoever. And so you take a low risk, high reward move on Jordan Poole. He's been pretty solid so far. We'll see if he can keep that up. But I kind of like the way he fits into this Pelicans roster.
Yeah, I think none of these moves really do much for them, frankly. I think it's just going to come down to like, is he going to be healthy? And is he going to be that guy that we expected him to be? Um, and that's it. I think Poole's fine. I think, like you said, worth the trade. He's a young guy still. He obviously was one of the key reasons why the Warriors won their recent championship. So yeah, I like that move. Looney, same deal with the Warriors. These guys are coming from like smart systems and bringing winning DNA to this Pelicans team that hasn't experienced much winning in a very long time. So yeah, I think B plus A minus off season for the Pelicans.
I
Um,
would I would give them the same. I think so. Yeah.
So moving on to the Washington Wizards, trading Jordan Poole on the other side of things. Obviously, we just spoke about the Pelicans, trading McCollum to the Wizards, getting some, I guess, veteran presence on that team, a young team, going after Johnson in the draft, Trey Johnson out of Texas. They traded for Cam Whitmore, which I loved. I mentioned that in the last episode, and going after Malachi Branham, who was a first round pick just a few years ago for the Spurs. So they made a lot of moves that seems like they're just they're in rebuild mode, right? And they got Bub Carrington. They got a lot of young guys that can potentially. One of them has to step up. One of them has to work out, right? So yeah, it's a B minus minus off season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair grade. I do think the Jordan Poole for McCollum trade's a bit weird, but it seems like they're trying to copy the Rockets MO where they signed Van Vliet and they signed Dylan Brooks to kind of pair veterans with younger players. And we saw how it turned out for the Rockets. I think this is a little different. I don't think CJ McCollum at this point in his career is as good as Van Vliet. With that being said, he's had like 9 straight seasons at 20 points per game, so we'll see if he can keep that going. Um, and then same goes for like Chris Middleton. He's definitely aging and declining. Um, yeah, I think you're higher on Cam Whitmore than I am. I see him as very much like a Cam Reddish type, where it's like he feels like he should be a good player, but he doesn't quite get there. At the same time, the trade was only 2 second round picks, so you make that deal every time for the chance of his upside. And yeah, I think Malachi Branham is a sneaky good signing. Like you said, he was a first round pick not too long ago. He's had some high scoring games in the past, so taking a flyer on him, I like. Um, yeah, the like you were saying again, they have a young core. No player so far has kind of come out as this star. I think they made a big mistake when they traded Denny Avdia to the Blazers because now he's made that jump not to a star but to a player who could potentially be an all-star down the line. And right now, the Wizards, I don't know if they have that. Sar had a fine rookie year, but he didn't do anything crazy. Bub Carrington, solid. Bilal Coulibaly, solid. I don't know if any of those players have big all-star potential. I don't know if you agree on that.
I think Koulibaly probably not. I think I think Bub Carrington maybe in like 5 years, if developed correctly, could. I really like Trey Johnson, but I don't. I think he's more. I think his comp is more Norman Powell. So like a fringe all star, one of the best shooters in the draft for sure. So yeah, I don't think they have that guy yet. But I think they could certainly make a trade, probably not this year, but in a year or two that gets them to that star. So I think
So
Alex Sarr hasn't shown that he's that guy either.
I agree. He's had a few good games, but overall, he's been a little disappointing, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, I do think that the Jordan Poole trade was a little weird. I'm gonna give him a C because and they didn't do much else besides that. Although the Cam Whitmore trade, only second round picks, I think that's enough to bump them up to a C plus.
Yeah, I'm at a C plus as well.
And on to the last team in today's video, the Utah Jazz. I think for me, there's like a theme with this offseason, and it's the fact that they waited too long to make their moves. I think, they could have traded Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson and even Laurie Markkinen at the deadline, or even earlier than that, but instead they got scraps. They had to release Jordan Clarkson. They traded John Collins for virtually nothing. They traded Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic. And I think that Markkinen's value now is a lot lower than it was at the start of last year. So I'm pretty low on their offseason because of that. Um, it's kind of funny though. The 4 players that they added outside of the draft this offseason were Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love, Gorgas Niang, and Yusuf Nurkic. And I was watching an episode of the No Dunks podcast, which I highly recommend. And they were talking about how those 4 might be the 4 slowest players in the entire NBA. And they were talking about who would of those 4 players would win in a potential race. And I'm curious who you think would come out on top on that.
I think Kevin Love still's got it. I think Minnesota Love maybe not, but I think he's slimmed down. And ooh, that's tough.
It's
But
tough.
definitely not Kyle Anderson.
Yeah. Mr. Slow Mo. Like,
Definitely not Kyle Anderson. But yeah, to your point, I think they made some late moves, obviously. And I think Sexton. is a great player. I think Clarkson, you can tell he was checked out last year in that system and wasn't really contributing much in a positive sense to, I guess, team basketball. So I think he was kind of bound to leave, and I selfishly, as a Knicks fan, I hope he kind of has the year that we expect him to as a prominent bench piece. But yeah, I think their offseason was, um, from a trade perspective, from a free agency perspective, not great by any means, but they did have a great draft between Walter Clayton Jr., Ace Bailey, and then the second round getting John Tonje out of Wisconsin. So yeah, I think overall, I think I'd give him a B minus C plus.
Yeah. I think I'm a little lower. I'll give them a C minus, maybe even a D. I think the draft is the only thing that saves them. I like that they basically said to Ace Bailey, "We don't care that you don't want to play here. We're gonna draft you anyway," because I do think he was the best player available. So that's the only thing that prevents them from an F in my mind because they just waited too long to make these moves. And I guess that's not really fair because going into the offseason, this is what they had. Um, so I guess if I'm strictly only grading them not on the past, but with what they were given in this offseason, it would still be like a C minus. They didn't get much value for who they traded away.
Fair
Any other
enough.
points?
Nothing on my end.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in to part two of us grading all of the offseason moves. Next week, we are going to be going over very early potential MVP candidates, rookie of the years, and all of the other awards. So we hope you tune in for that video. Thank you guys a bunch. Please like, please subscribe, please comment, and we will see you in the next video.
Thank you guys a bunch.
See ya.